Right, good afternoon. Welcome to this latest in the series of webinars by IEEE UK and Ireland Blockchain Group. And pleased to be able to welcome today Salisu Uba from University of Strathclyde, where he's doing his PhD currently, who's going to tell us about blockchain adoption in the oil and gas supply chain. Please make sure you're muted unless you need to ask a question. And could I please ask that in the interests of sort of fluidity and flow, we try to keep questions to the end. We'll have a Q&A session at the end of going through the main presentation. What you can do though is if questions occur to you and you don't want to lose track of them, do please type them into the chat box and then we can address those at the end. And without further ado, then I think I'll hand over. Over to you.
Yeah, hello everyone. Thank you, Richard. Let me share my screen, sorry. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah. Hello everyone. Good afternoon. Good evening. It depends from your timing zone. My name is Salisu Uba, and I am a PhD research student at the Department of Design, Manufacturing, and Engineering Management at the University of Strathclyde, Glasgow, United Kingdom. Let me start by appreciating the organizers of this webinar, the IEEE, particularly Richard and your incredible team. Thank you very much for availing me with this opportunity to share my research. I also like to acknowledge my supervisor. I'm not sure if he's here, but he has really been the backbone of this research from the beginning to where I am at the moment. And I would also like to acknowledge the Petroleum Technology Development Funds, PTDF. It's a Nigerian organization that is training, and building capacity of Nigerians in the oil and gas industry to fill the gap in the industry. So to the participants, I would also appreciate, apart from questions at the end of my presentation, I would also appreciate if you can, give a critical or rather constructive comment and feedback. So a little bit deeper about myself. My background is in accounting and supply chain management. I have worked in diverse industries within the oil and gas, finance, and defense industry in Nigeria and in the Middle East, and now I'm in Europe conducting these projects. So my current project is looking at the adoption of blockchain technology in the oil and gas supply chain in Nigeria. Particularly, I'm trying to explore the perception of blockchain adoption by the stakeholders in the oil and gas supply chain in Nigeria. In addition to that, I am a fellow of Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply, FCIPS, and Chartered Institute of Loan and Risk Management. And I'm also a member of the Chartered Management Institute, CMI, ISPIM, International Society of Professional Innovation Management, as well as Council of Supply Chain Management Professionals. So highlight of our discussion today is going to center around looking at the context, an overview of the oil and gas industry in Nigeria, understanding blockchain technology, the without model, approach of the study, methodology down to contribution, and key references for anyone interested in. Right. So it is always important to have a context in a discussion so that you will not be taken out of context. So for the purpose of this presentation or our discussion today, my context is around supply chain, blockchain technology, and the Nigerian oil and gas industry. This is quite important because whatever I'm doing has to be limited to these specific three areas. Now, it is important to understand, because of the fact that we have narrowed ourselves into the context of the discussion, to have an overview about the oil and gas industry in Nigeria. So oil was discovered in Olebiri, Bayelsa State in the south part of Nigeria, far back 1956. This makes Nigeria to have a total estimate reserve of 37.06 billion barrels and 187 trillion standard cubic feet, respectively. This is quite huge, significant number. However, the country's peak production capacity at the moment is expected to be 2.5 million barrels per day. But because of obviously some factors, the production capacity at the moment, as far back as Q4 of 2020, is 1,560,000,000 barrels per day. Well, this is attributed to so many factors, including the downfall in oil price, but consistently the capacity of production within the industry has not go above 2 million barrels. The oil and gas industry contributes 70% of the Nigeria's total revenue. However, it only contributes 5.87 to the GDP, gross domestic product. This is as at Q4 of 2020. So it means this is an industry that is generating huge resources, but it has less impact to Nigerians. It is also interesting to know that the industry is highly regulated, but full of inefficiencies, especially in the midstream and downstream subsectors. And this is attributed to so many factors over the years. There is also the concept or the concern around regulatory uncertainty. This is largely for some that are aware of the industry. There is a lingering issue of subsidy, whether to remove subsidy or to maintain subsidy. Subsidy is an amount of resources that the government is paying to bridge the cost of importing petroleum products into the country to the final consumers, meaning so in some instances, the landing cost of a petroleum product is a little bit higher than the expected price to be sold in the market. So the government has to intervene by providing subsidy in order to get the petroleum product at an affordable price. And again, part of the regulatory uncertainty includes the Petroleum Industry Bill. The Petroleum Industry Bill has been lingering for almost 16 years today. It was only last 2 years or so that an effort was made to dismantle the bill into some sections. A petroleum industry governance bill was passed into law. But I mean, this is really an important issue that has contributed to regulatory uncertainty, because part of the problem that is being highlighted in the industry is you have an operator that is also serving as a regulator. So, and of course, the issues around lack of commercialization of the national oil company and so on. So another key thing is to look at the structure of the industry. Having said that the industry is highly regulated and quite complex, it is also important to understand what is the structure of the industry. Well, like any other oil and gas industry around the world, the industry is categorized into three subsectors. You have the upstream, the midstream, and downstream. The upstream is basically dealing with exploration and production activities, both in the offshore and the onshore. And this is largely governed by joint venture agreements, production sharing contract, and this is being done by the major players, where you have the national oil company going into joint venture with international oil companies like the Shell, the likes of Chevron, Mobil, Total, etc. But there is also local participation, local oil companies that manage marginal fields and of course new fields through the NPDC, which is the Nigerian Petroleum Development Company. In terms of regulating the activities of the upstream, we have some organizations or agencies that look into the aspects of regulating this particular subsector. And the key regulating agency or the policing of the this particular sector is the Petroleum Department of Petroleum Resources, DPR, and of course you have the Petroleum Ministry, which is the highest policy driving agency for the industry, not just the sector. You have the likes of NESRIA looking at environmental regulation in relation to this particular subsector. And in order to increase participation of local content in this particular sector, there is also the Nigerian Content Development Board trying to see how Nigerians can benefit from this industry by engaging local companies and all of that. And if you look at the aspect of the midstream, it deals with transportation, storage, and processing of natural gas. This is quite an important and critical area or subsector in the structure of the industry. However, there are a lot of challenges in this particular midstream section, because the country has less capacity when it comes to refining its own products for local consumption. What that means, these products, or rather the goods that is being produced in the country, has to be exported and then imported back as a petroleum product back to the country for local consumption. So in terms of operating arrangement, they also have what they call the DSDP, direct sales, direct purchase. There's also rig service contract. And of course, they also have some, though largely now it is being facilitated by a single body, the National Oil Company. But you also have some major players around that. You have the likes of NIDAS, Nikoma, NPSC, Nigerian Pipeline Storage Company. And it's also highly regulated. The regulation in the upstream also affects the midstream. That's the likes of the Department of Petroleum Resources and the Ministry of Petroleum Resources. The most complex subsector in the structure of the oil and gas industry in Nigeria is the downstream sector, where you have, or you are expected to have, the refining, the marketing and distribution of the petroleum and gas products. This is one of the subsector that is being considered as an inefficient because of a lot of supply chain and value chain issues. And this particular sector is being managed, or the key players or major players in this particular subsector are the likes of the major marketers, the independent marketers, and most of the indigenous companies. And the sector is being regulated also by the Department of Petroleum Resources, the Ministry of Petroleum Resources, and other agencies like the Petroleum Products Pricing Regulatory Authority, and so on. So looking at this particular slides, it gives you an overview that the industry is quite complex and highly regulated, probably not similar to what is obtained in other places around the world. Yeah. So having established the structure of the industry, it is also important to look at one of our key area of discussion, which is the supply chain. What are the issues that are there in the industry in terms of looking at it from the supply chain point of view? So from the upstream, that's the exploration and production components of the industry. There is an illegal bunkering, ship-to-ship bunkering. This is also largely being seen as a sabotage, both from the internal and external stakeholders. And of course, because the refining capacity of the country is not really yielding any results, because most of the products, about 80 to 90% of the petroleum products consumed in Nigeria are being imported, meaning it has to be exported and then re-imported back to the country for consumption. And the pipeline tapping is also a big supply chain issue, but however, most of the products are now being transported through trucks rather than pipelines, because most of the refining facilities are not functional. You also have down to the downstream, which is the from depots down to distribution for retail consumption. There is a lot of issues in this particular value chain. Issues to do with smuggling, products that are meant to be are meant for the consumption of Nigerians are being smuggled out of the country through neighboring borders and all of that. And when it comes to the retail, they also have their own share of the problem, which is adulteration of the products and so on. So this has actually brought the issue of lack of transparency in all the value chain. It is obvious because there is no interconnectivity and transparent sharing of data and having visibility around the supply chain. And of course, there is lack of accountability because a lot of revenue have been waste, not accounted for because of lack of supply chain optimization and a lot of that. And of course, the government being the sole, or rather, the 70% of where the government is getting revenue, it is clear that the government is losing a lot of money from these particular inefficiencies. And the industry or the supply chain is considered to be dealing with a lot of manual processes. There is lack of digitalization in the supply chain. And there is also lack of collaboration between the particular players, because you have the big wins and all of that. So there is a lot of inefficiency in terms of, because lack of collaboration can lead to a lot of not just loss of revenue, but inefficiencies, which at the end of the day is going to be a big issue to the industry. I have a video here that I want you to have a look.
let's talk about Nigeria and its oil. Nigeria is Africa's top oil producer, and oil is the government's biggest source of revenue. But the economy has been struggling, and poverty levels are on the rise.
The poverty of those living around the source of Nigeria's wealth is there to see.
So why can't Nigerians depend on their country's oil wealth? What happens to all that money? They call Nigeria the African giant for a reason. It's home to Africa's biggest population and largest economy, powered by a growing services industry and agricultural exports like cocoa and palm oil. It has Nollywood, Africa's biggest film industry, fashion houses, a booming music business, and a very wealthy elite, including the richest man in Africa, Aliko Dangote. Nigeria also has a lot of natural resources, minerals, gold, and oil. Lots of oil. It's got the second largest proven reserves on the African continent and is the 12th largest producer worldwide. And yet, many Nigerians have it hard. World Poverty Clock says 90 million people live not just in poverty, but extreme poverty. That's 48% of the population. Compare that to 24% in Ethiopia and 16% in Kenya, and they don't even have oil.
Despite Nigeria's vast oil wealth, half its population lives on less than $2 a day.
Now, you'd think a resource-rich country like Nigeria could rely on some of that oil wealth. The thing is, the Nigerian government does, but that's part of the problem. Nigeria's government depends on oil for as much as 75% of its revenue. So when global oil prices bottomed out in 2014, Nigeria went into recession, and it's still struggling to get out. But even when oil prices are good, Nigerian experts say not a huge slice of that revenue gets to the people.
The focus should be of the money that the Nigerian government gets, how much is reinvested into the lives of the people.
They're still using some of that oil revenue to pay off debts and the rest to pay salaries to the lawmakers. So things like schools, hospital, infrastructure, much needed infrastructure does not get built.
Okay, so where does that revenue go? Let's follow the money and the oil. Nigerian crude is found right here under the waterways of the Niger Delta. A few Nigerian companies operate there, but the ones doing most of the exploring and extracting are international companies. Shell is one of the big ones. It provides 40% of Nigeria's oil production. But because Nigeria doesn't have the infrastructure to refine its own crude oil, these foreign companies sell it abroad. And in the end, Nigeria has to import billions of dollars worth of refined oil back in.
Multinational actually extracts the oil. So if they think that refining the oil in Switzerland or refining it in the United States will help them lower costs, definitely that's where they will do it, because the capacity to refine it isn't there in Nigeria.
Now, what Nigeria does have is a central body called the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation. The NNPC is both an oil industry regulator and a massive commercial corporation. The corporation arm signs contracts with all those international companies, and the companies pay for all the initial costs, plus things like oil licenses, royalties, and a tax on their profits to the NNPC. So the NNPC takes all that money and pays it into Nigeria's national treasury. But the regulator that's supposed to police that flow of money is part of the NNPC.
It means that there's a huge lack of transparency, that a lot of transactions are happening under a cloak of obscurity. You cannot be both a regulator and a player. You can't be a referee and a player as well. It just doesn't make any sense.
That lack of transparency has led to corruption in the oil sector. Billions of dollars in oil money have gone missing over the years. One of the most infamous cases was back in 2016.
It was reported that $16 billion in oil revenue had just gone missing. And this money was supposed to be given from NNPC and sent to the National Treasury, but the money was not sent over. So every few years in Nigerian headlines, you see things like 16 billion missing, 30 billion missing.
There's another type of missing oil money, and that's taxes. As we mentioned earlier, international oil companies are supposed to pay taxes on their oil profits to the NNPC. The companies are accused of reporting lower profits in order to pay fewer taxes. So a company can sell Nigerian oil at a lower price to its own subsidiary in a tax haven and then sell that oil to other buyers at full price. They can inflate the costs of their Nigerian operations or underreport the volume of oil they produce to begin with. So public oil money gets lost in a swamp of tax havens and murky accounting. And then there's theft. Yes, straight up stealing.
Tucked in the forest, we find these men cooking oil.
There are hundreds of illegal refineries in the Niger Delta, where criminal gangs like the Delta Avengers tap into pipelines. In early 2019, 22 million barrels of oil were stolen and sold on the black market.
The barges then take it to larger tankers in the Atlantic Ocean, and from there to buyers in West Africa, Europe, Latin America, and as far as Asia.
There's even a language in Nigeria that conveys and captures the sentiment that the oil is here to steal. For example, you'll hear a phrase in Nigeria called the national cake, and that just means the oil money.
Oil companies like Shell blame these attacks from massive oil spills and fires. But human rights group Amnesty International says oil companies are also responsible for the spills and accuse them of misleading and neglecting local communities. So sabotage, theft, tax evasion, corruption, lots to tackle. But Nigeria's government has been releasing annual audit reports on its energy industry, demanding unpaid taxes and compensation from international oil companies, and after 17 years of delays, is ready to implement the Petroleum Industries Bill. The bill has its critics, but many in Nigeria hope it'll clean up the oil sector by doing things like splitting the NNPC's commercial business from its regulator. Nigeria also says it wants to diversify its economy away from oil, and there are signs it wants to develop its own industry to cut back on all the foreign involvement. Remember Aliko Dangote, Africa's richest man? Let's talk about Nigeria and its oil.
Yeah, this is really an interesting video. However, there are a lot of developments around the industry, especially going by the fact that the current president of the country is committed to fighting corruption. And the president is also doubled as the Minister of Petroleum Resources. So we expect a lot of things to change, and there are so many things going around. But this is quite important for you to give you a more robust understanding about the challenges, the supply chain issues within the industry. So the next item here is to look at the whole idea or the whole concept about blockchain. I mean, this is something that started as far back as 2008, though it has no unilateral or consensus definition, but I like this definition by Francisco and Swanson, which says blockchain is characterized as an open source, decentralized, distributed database for storing transaction information, rather than relying on centralized intermediary, e.g. banks or intermediaries. This technology allows two parties to transact directly using duplicates link ledger called block in a chain. This is quite important because looking at the keywords here, open source, decentralized, distributed database for storing transaction information, and of course, allowing two parties to transact directly without using third party. This is quite interesting and fascinating technology. Of course, this will make transaction considerably more transparent than those provided by centralized system. Although there are so many discussions around the nature of blockchain, whether public, private, or hybrid, but considerably, this should be an interesting technology to explore. And of course, transactions are executed without relying on trust, thus building trust on third parties like what we have at the moment. So this is going to be an interesting technology for industry like the supply chain. Of course, like I highlighted, it all started with a white paper released by Nakamoto. The potential capacity to disrupt businesses is quite huge, and particularly the aspect of decentralization disintermediation, immutability, and security has really attracted a lot of attention for industry players to see what this technology has to offer. But unfortunately, despite all this development around blockchain, practical applications, especially outside the financial industry or financial transactions, though it has been established the potential is beyond just the financial, but can actually makes a lot of difference in supply chain. The literature in blockchain in supply chain is still at infancy stage. It's about up to now, most of the applications are either at proof of concept or proof of work stage. However, there is a lot of applications going on, but it has not scaled to an industry level. But there are so many cases, especially in relation to integrating payment system into food supply chain. As far back as 2017, about 8% of 26,000 blockchain projects started in 2016. That's meaning within a year, there has been almost 26,000 projects ongoing on. And this figure is changing every day. It is also regarded that technological uncertainty, scalability issues, development costs create major challenge for this particular technology. In 2008 alone, blockchain shows symptoms similar to the internet bubble, which burst in 2000. And this is quite interesting because an article, there is a publication by Gartner in 2000 called the Hype Cycle for Blockchain Technology 2019. This is quite interesting because it has elaborated on some of the key applications and the expected period for its adoption. Clearly, for us in supply chain, there is some level of, though there are some levels of adoptions, particularly in areas like smart contract, which is the prediction is about 2 to 5 years. This is also practically possible looking at some of the solutions, though they have not scaled to an industry level, but this is a big potential for the industry. So now we need to establish some of the areas looking at the predicaments or challenges in the oil and gas supply chain, particularly in Nigeria, because we have to be mindful of the context in which we are discussing. Looking at the chain from vessel to receiving terminal, loading depot, receiving depot to final destination for the consumers, where you have a lot of stakeholders ranging from the IOCs, NOCs, operators, regulators, revenue, marketers, and people. These are some key areas that the industry can quite benefit from this technology. But importantly, blockchain is not a kind of technology that can work in isolation. Of course, it has to rely on so many existing infrastructure, and of course, it has to be also integrated into other technologies like the IoT. And this is why a concept of chain of things was proposed in order to ensure that the physical supply chain is being integrated by the data and the soft side of the technology. It will help in areas like planning and forecasting, procurement and supply chain, because there is a lot of contract management, like I highlighted some of the operationals arrangement in the industry. You look at areas of supply chain finance, And of course, looking at execution and projects, it will help in ensuring that project risk management is really reduced, redefining transportation, regulatory compliance, down to asset management, and of course, above all, is to have more transparency in the process, which is having more visibility around crude exports, because there is some facts around that Nigeria has no accurate figure of the amount of petroleum products being produced. So this is quite an area that the blockchain can have a lot of potential in terms of transforming the industry for better. So what is the government of Nigeria doing in terms of blockchain technology? Well, it's interesting to know that part of this administration is committed to digitalize the country's economy, and this is how they come up with the digital economy concept and integrated into the communication ministry. The IT regulator of the country was very fast and proactive in drafting a national blockchain adoption strategy, which centers around some key initiatives, strategic objectives, and of course, aligning it with government policies and regulatory framework. However, this is a draft that is still on the process of development, but from the industry level, nothing has really been has really been done. There are so many efforts in order to explore this technology, although recently there is a ban of cryptocurrency operations in Nigeria, and a directive was even issued to close accounts of all parties or individuals that involved into digital currency operations in Nigeria. So, looking at all these things that we have established, the oil and gas supply chain pain points, and of course, we have explored the potential of this unique technology rather, we have a big issue, a big challenge, which is adoption of this blockchain. How are we going to go about adopting these technologies? Obviously, there are so many concerns, so many reasons, so many resistance, technicalities around what is going to happen around blockchain adoption. So the whole idea of this research, having established the fact that there are so many stakeholders in these industries, and the stakeholders are the key players in ensuring that initiative like that of blockchain is being scaled through, because they have to take the right decisions. They have to understand this technology. So the approach of this work is to understand to actually understand from these stakeholders their perception around blockchain adoption in the oil and gas industry. Knowing fully that some of these stakeholders are beneficiaries of some of these inefficiencies in the industry. How do we go about doing this? It's quite difficult in understanding people's behavior around certain phenomena. So one of the key things that is going to guide this investigation is the UTAUT model. UTAUT is the Unified Theory of Acceptance and Use of Technology model. It is actually been developed in order to understand the user acceptance of new technology. And this also helps in predicting behaviors around adoption / use of new technology, assessing the likelihood of acceptance of new technology, understanding factors that drive acceptance of the new technology, as well as identifying why certain technology adoption fails or not. So having done that, these are some of the constructs of the theory, things like performance expectancy, effort expectancy, facilitating conditions, social influence, can actually aid the understanding or predicting the behaviors of certain individuals or group around technology adoption. So I am particularly using this theory as a guide in order to understand the stakeholders' perception in relation to the adoption of this technology. And the method is to identify, or rather the methodology process is to do a stakeholders mapping, conduct an interview, familiarize with data, generate codes, and do a lot of analysis and arrive at this particular understanding these particular behaviors of stakeholders around this technology. And of course, lastly but not the least, the expected contribution for this work is to come up with a new approach for assessing the role of stakeholders on adoption of blockchain by understanding their behaviors, enhance the understanding of the dynamics of blockchain adoption, particularly in developing country context in the oil and gas supply chain specifically. And of course, this is going to contribute hugely to the supply chain literature. And this research is expected to guide the adopters in understanding key influencing factors to integrate into blockchain models. Because of time, I would love to have some questions. So thank you very much for the opportunity, and I hope you enjoyed this presentation, and I look forward to hear I look forward for your comments, questions, and observations, please. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Salisu. That's a really great introduction to an area that I think a lot of us will be quite new to a lot of us. If any of the participants have questions, please feel free to either come off mute and just ask, or alternatively, you can type it into the chat box and we can read it out to everybody. I guess one question that occurred to me there was there's obviously a whole range of different size and scale organizations and vested interests that are at play within this supply chain, within the oil and gas market. And part of the challenge there is to actually get them engaged in this process. Is there a lot of buy-in, or is there resistance to participating in trying to understand how well this will be adopted?
Yeah, thank you very much for this question. I think at the moment I have conducted a lot of industry engagements, and there is a lot of optimism around the technology. However, one of the key concepts or key concern around the technology at the moment is lack of understanding the technology itself. So until when people are aware of this kind of technology, because it is quite complex for them to understand how and to what extent. And one interesting fact is the fact that the industry is always lagging behind when it comes to technology adoption. So really, these are factors, although the COVID-19 and a lot of things has really pushed a lot of organizations to test or try new ways of doing things. But really, to some extent, there is going to be, I foresee some level of resistance, particularly from the key operators, because one of the participants actually mentioned to me that there's a discussion around how to use blockchain for trading Nigerian petroleum products, but the company that is in charge of the trading was really totally against this, stating so many factors. I mean, overfishing the technology and all of that. So there is going to be huge resistance, especially knowing fully that some of these stakeholders are quite benefiting from these inefficiencies. But from the commitment of the administration, and particularly the giant driver of the industry, which is the National Oil Company, is committed to transparency and in using its own challenge. I hope this answers your question.
Yep, you would just seem to be cutting out slightly at the end there. We've got a question on the chat here. How much blockchain technology is supported by the government in Nigeria?
At the moment, there is no any, to my knowledge, there is no any project, although there are so many projects going on like mine, but a practical industry project, probably to say is being tested and all of that, there is none to my knowledge. However, like I mentioned in my presentation, the National Technology Development Agency is doing a lot of things in seeing how they can design a framework that is going to guide the adoption of blockchain in Nigeria.
Okay, and we have a second question here from Tiziana. Are there many intermediaries more likely to succumb or be substituted by an E-version of the same business model?
Well, it all depends from certain factors, but I believe so many efforts are being made in order to, particularly the aspect of the petroleum industry bill, if passed into law, is going to change a lot of things, because it's going to structure the industry or restructure the industry instead. So I believe while there are so many factors to look into, but I believe that is not going to be the case.
And do you think that the particular characteristics of blockchain, where it's both shared trust and nobody has to trust people they don't know about, do you think those specific characteristics around trust are well understood amongst all the players in the industry? Is that something you see you're going to have to be selling, those particular aspects of the technology?
Yeah, I think the main key thing here is the fact that looking at the constraint of the industry, the structure of the industry, it is likely going to have a consortium blockchain rather than having different sort of solutions and all of that. And what that means is, like, I am aware of in the UK, there is an effort by the blue chips to they set up a blockchain consortium trying to understand the technology and look at particular areas of adoption. So I think for those that understand the technology, they have a clear understanding and they recognize the needs to have a technology that you can build in a trustless society, and this is something that they believe is going to enhance the operations of the industry and ensure transparency more than ever before. But the question is to what extent they are willing to. This is the decision of not one individual or two, but it has to be around all players, and the regulators are always passionate about seeing how fast they can benefit from it in terms of ensuring maximum regulation and coming up in terms with what they want, not just for the benefit of the companies, but rather for them, because they are representing or protecting the interests of the government of the country.
Thanks. And a question from Suleiman. Are you aware of blockchain adoption in oil and gas in other parts of the world? If yes, what is the extent of success there?
Yeah, I am aware of particularly like in the Middle East. I know of ADNOC, the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company, they had deployed a blockchain solution, and it's quite successful for more than about 3 years now. And of course, some companies in the US, particularly the consortium I have mentioned to you, is quite successful, but it's still tailored to not supply chain, but rather the financial transactions, ensuring things like letter of credit, facilitating payments, and all of that. Like the IBM, I know they are successful in partnering with, there's a company, I can't remember the name, but they have successfully deployed a solution that facilitate payments and between their suppliers using blockchain technology. But at industry level, I'm not aware of any at the moment. It's still under exploration. So many efforts are going on, and I'm also aware of the AFRC, Advanced Forming Research Center here in Glasgow, is also working with one company to use distributed ledger technology for assets, this asset integrity also. So I mean, I cannot determine the success at the moment, because literally what my research focuses on is trying to understand their perception about the technology. Is it even something that is going to be welcome or not? How do they feel about having a technology with such kind of characteristics?
Okay, so really just a couple of minutes left. Do we have any other questions? Okay, well, that was great. Thanks, Salisu. Thanks very much for a really terrific and engaging presentation. I think there's a lot to think about there. I've been recording the session, so the recording will be up on our group website shortly, and I will send round a link to all participants so that you can view the recording again at your own leisure. Can we also put a PDF of the slides up there? Is that okay? Yeah, sure. Okay, brilliant. So you could. I noticed there was a links page at the end that people might like to follow up on as well. So I think it just remains for us all to give a virtual round of applause to you. Thank you very much for that, and thanks to all our audience for joining. Thank you very much, everybody, and have a good rest of day.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure as well. Thank you, everyone, for attending.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye now.
Bye. Thank you.